Hello, this is Bill in Oklahoma City again. Still with a PhD in U.S. history, still with a J.D., still with a Mike Pence fly on my forehead again. I'm sorry, I got a few flies around here. Again, video is not my long suit. I much prefer to write things down, but everybody seems to like video these days, and I want to talk to people, so I'm going to talk on video. Hi, here I am on video. Don't expect really high production values, and again, do not expect me to go out and sit in my car and make a video because I'm not going to do that. That strikes me as really kind of stupid. I noticed that everybody likes to have car videos, especially Ryan Walters, the idiot who's running for superintendent of public education in the state of Oklahoma, the guy who wants to reject all federal funds for public education in Oklahoma. I'm like, that's a really bad idea, but it's a really Republican, really conservative idea. Because again, conservatives dislike we confuse conservatives and libertarians because they both are worried about a large, powerful federal government, which is not, not on its own terms a bad idea. I mean, it is true that, as I said before, our government is supposed to be powerful, but it's also supposed to be limited. And it doesn't always necessarily abide by the limits which originally set forth in the Constitution, partly because of good Republican Supreme Court justices. Although you have to admit, Antonin Scalia was a big Fourth Amendment kind of guy. He's the one who wrote the majority opinion saying that police officers cannot drive down the street pointing a heat-seeking wand at everybody's house to try to find out who's growing marijuana in their house and who's not, because a search without any probable cause, without a warrant, and you're not allowed to do that. So Scalia's pretty big on the Fourth Amendment. Scalia also explicitly said that if you were a king, and people burned the national flag, he'd throw them in jail, or throw them in prison, or whatever. But he's not king; he's a Supreme Court justice, although sometimes it's not clear he understood the distinction as clearly as he said he did. But anyway, but he said under this, and he was very clear under the Constitution, burning the flag is protected political speech. And so he said, okay, you should be free to burn the flag if you really want to burn the flag, which that's pretty, not conservative. That's defending the liberal rights, and rights are a distinctly liberal idea, by the way. Real conservatives in the Anglo-American dispensation, anyway, real conservatives are monarchists, and monarchists say, shut up and do what the king tells you to do. And again, with the notion of natural rights, as we understand them in the United States anyway, comes from John Locke. You often hear a lot of Catholic scholars like to talk about natural law, but those like to talk about the natural law theory in terms of Catholic scholarship, which is fine. There's obviously a long, impressive tradition of Catholic natural law theorizing going on out there, but it's not particularly relevant to the United States. If you want to talk about natural law in the United States, you really, really have to talk about John Locke. And these Catholics never want to talk about John Locke. I'm like, okay, I'll talk about natural law with you all day long, but I'm going to start with John Locke. And John Locke is the only natural law theorist who's really, truly relevant to the United States. But anyway, so I'm here to talk mostly about why it is the case. It's a sad state of the United States that so William F. Buckley, when we talked about the man who portrayed himself as being a man standing athwart history yelling stop, which is just it's incredibly stupid and fantastically self-aggrandizing. He's like, whoa, dude, you need to get over yourself. Take a chill pill and just go away. That's completely ridiculous. No, you can't do that. But anyway, that was William F. Buckley's self-understanding. He started the National Review because he wanted to make conservatism fashionable, and unfortunately, he succeeded to a regrettable degree. Because now all of a sudden it's so fashionable to be conservative that you can be a complete blithering idiot and have a platform and a fairly substantial audience just as long as you say I'm a conservative. Now I'm emphatically saying I'm not a conservative, which means I probably won't get much of an audience because people don't like because the kind of people who follow conservatives around are sheep and they're not interested in reality, they're interested in conservatism. And people who are interested in reality have lots of other options and lots of people to listen to and talk to, and so who knows whether anybody will pay attention to me or not. But anyway, so my problem is the fact that you can be a complete blithering idiot and still have a platform and an audience as long as you say I'm a conservative. Now, most conservatives, a lot of conservative stupidity is actually pretty harmless. We can say, well, so I think that right now the modal example of harmless conservative stupidity would be Sarah Palin. Sarah Palin's dumb as a post. She's just as dumb as she can be. She's as dumb as Donald Trump. She's not quite as crazy as narcissistic as Donald. She's pretty narcissistic, but not as bad as Donald Trump. Partly because it's hard to be that badly. It's hard for women to be as narcissistic as men are, and she's not. She's just dumb and not quite as crazy as Donald Trump. And of course, she has no chance of becoming president. Part of the reason why she was pretty harmless, despite her profound stupidity, is the fact she did not get to become vice president. Now, of course, it's kind of hard to do too much harm as vice president. As a Democrat in the 1930s who said that the vice presidency isn't worth a bucket of warm piss. Some people like to say spit, but he said piss, but anyway, because he's a Democrat, so Democrats tend to use kind of salty language. He said the vice presidency is not worth a bucket of warm piss. And he's right, because you can't really, you can't really, you just, vice presidents usually, we don't pay much attention to vice presidents. Kamala Harris is doing an outstanding job as vice president. She's being running all over the place, doing all sorts of things and being very visible, but that's unusual. Vice president is usually not somebody you pay much attention to, and they can't usually do too much harm. So, and John McCain then ended up surviving both of Barack Obama's two terms, and so presumably John McCain would not have died in office during his first term and left Sarah Palin as president, which is a truly terrifying thought. Because Sarah Palin could have done, again, she's not because she said again, as with Donald Trump, she's too stupid to figure out how to use the presidency effectively to do as much harm as she could. But still, it's really we were better off not having Sarah Palin as president or as vice president for that matter. But anyway, so Sarah Palin is both stupid and conservative, and whatever that means in the United States. And not clear to me what I mean. Sarah Palin is an excellent example. What exactly does Sarah Palin believe? Who knows? I don't particularly want to know. Some of them, but she apparently is nationally conservative, and she's stupid, and she's mostly pretty harmless. On the other hand, now again, I apologize. Again, video is not my medium, and I'm sure there's some fancy way for me to splice this video into the video that I'm making right now, so that it'd be more effective way for me to show this to you, because I'm not sure that you can be able to see this. But so if you want to find out what I'm talking about here, this is a tweet by the Jewish Ginger Resistor on Twitter, Jewish Ginger Resistor, showing Nick Fuentes being a good Christian conservative. And he's talking about, so he says, it's no longer anti-Semitic to hate Jews because they don't serve Jesus Christ and need to get the fuck out of America. This is a conservative Christian position, by the way. Uh, Jews don't serve Jesus Christ and need to get the fuck out of America. I don't serve Jesus Christ either, and I ain't getting out of the fuck out of America, out of the United States of America, because I was born here. I'm a citizen of the United States. Like a lot of Jews, Jews are like 3% of the population, by the way. Jews are a tiny minority in the United States, but boy, good those good Christian conservatives are obsessed with the Jews. The Jews are, George Soros is going to take over. He's going to pay all these the rest of us out here to try to harass this poor pitiful put upon conservatives. This man Nick Fuentes is out here being overtly anti-Semitic, and excuse me, but we know what happens with that. Okay, I guess for Christian conservatives in the United States, one Holocaust just wasn't enough. They want to keep on. Why is it Christians can't stop picking on Jews? Just stop. I think this is. I mean, I think this is reprehensible and disgusting, and I very much doubt that Nick Fuentes will be able to gain the kind of, or his Republican cronies who want to pick on Jews will gain enough power to be able to do what they say they want to do. But I think part of the reason for that is because lots of other thinking people will stand up and say, boy, that's a really bad idea. Shut up. Don't do that. No, we shouldn't pick on Jews at all. End of discussion. Full stop. And the whole thing about, I didn't speak up for the Jews because I wanted a Jew. I didn't speak up for the trade unions because I wanted trade unions. And then when they came for me, they wanted to speak up for me. Okay, that's nice, but that ties opposition to Nazi-style oppression to self-interest, which is not bad or wrong. But at the same time, you shouldn't need any self-interest. It's just wrong. I mean, just no, don't pick on anybody. Don't pick on Jews, don't pick on black people, don't pick on trade unionists, don't pick on anybody at all. Then tell conservatives, Christian conservatives, to stop picking on everybody else. So, I mean, this is really deep. Let's see if I don't know if you can be able to, how much this you'll be able to get from.
Flash, and every Christian, this should be they hate Jesus. If you hate Jesus, you have a problem with me. Newsflash, and every Christian, this should be the mantra. If you hate Jesus, you have a problem with Christians. Straight up. Don't tell me religious Jews or whatever. Question, do you hate Jesus? Because if you do, that's a problem. That's a big problem. It's especially a big problem if you have any influence whatsoever. If you hate Jesus and you have influence, it's my job that you don't have influence anymore. Because I'm a real Christian. I'm not just one of these, hey, believe whatever you want. Our job is to save souls and get people to heaven and fight the devil. So don't tell me.
I mean, how many problems can we see here? This is just revolting. This is disgusting reprehensible, and it's becoming increasingly mainstream political discourse in the United States. This Nick Fuentes guy, he's not like running for office that I know of, and he says he's going to stop people from having influence. I don't know how he thinks he's going to do that, because I don't think many people are going to want to listen to him. He's spewing this kind of nonsense. I'm certainly not going. I'm not going to stop trying to have influence just because Nick Fuentes. I mean, I'm not a Christian either. I'm not. I'm Buddhist. I'm gay. I'm a gay Buddhist, and I don't have anything to do with Jesus Christ because Jesus Christ is a fairy tale. If the historical Jesus even existed at all, it doesn't matter because human beings do not come back to life 3 days after they die, and there is no omnipotent daddy in the sky to suck the Christ up into heaven to sit by his right hand. So this supposedly omnipotent deity can only have one begotten son. Why? And the other thing, even if this Jesus guy did in fact die a grisly, horrible death by crucifixion 2,000 years ago, or whatever, however long ago it was, that may very well have happened. I don't know. I don't care. I have a PhD in U.S. history. I could go do even though my PhD is in U.S. history, still the basic tools of historical research which I have mastered long ago, would allow me to go dig into the literature and find out what people are saying about the existence or non-existence of the historical Jesus. I don't care. Because what matters about Jesus is not Jesus, but the Christ figure, which is the fairy tale image of this guy who supposedly came back to life 3 days after he died and got sucked from heaven by supposedly omnipotent daddy. The omnipotent daddy does not exist. He did not come back to life 3 days after he died. He did not say, he did not redeem anybody's sins, whatever sin is. Sin is a stupid question, concept. And apparently, as I understand it, there are Christians who do not adopt the position of original sin. But I mean, even in terms of the internal logic of Christianity, I don't understand. You get rid of original sin, then what is the point of crucifying Jesus? I mean, the whole thing, none of it makes any sense to me at all. I'm not a Christian. I don't want to be a Christian. I'm not interested in being a Christian. But I'm a citizen of the United States, and Nick Fuentes can come over and mess with me if he wants to. We'll go talk about it in front of a federal judge. I mean, even I'm just not so worried about that. But Nick Fuentes is still making this. The fact that he's out here talking about this and he says again, he says that it's no longer anti-Semitic. He says it's hugely anti-Semitic, and especially the other thing, he starts out the implicit assumption behind his initial message here is, if you hate Jesus, I don't hate Jesus. I don't hate anybody. I don't even hate Nick Fuentes. I think Nick Fuentes is a pawn scum. I think Nick Fuentes should be not. I think everybody should talk about how horrible his message is, and call him out and say you need to stop picking on Jews. But I don't hate him. I don't need to hate him to say that his message is grotesque. And I mean, I don't, okay, Jews as a class by definition do not recognize Jesus as the Savior, whatever that means. That's just called, that's a whole other. Good Christian Republicans apparently regard Trump as their savior, which shows you how flexible and fungible and elastic that term is. Whatever. And so anybody can be a savior. Trump can be a savior. Anybody can be a savior. Um, I'm not interested in having a savior. I don't need a savior. I'm Buddhist. I can, save myself. Thank you very much. I don't need anybody. Nobody else can do it for you. You have to do it yourself. But that's a whole separate question. But so anyway, Jews by definition do that. One of the things is a religious question that differentiates Jews from Christians is that Christians say Jesus is a savior, and Jews are like, yeah, no, he's a pretty cool teacher, good guy, we like him fine, but he wasn't the savior. And so that doesn't mean that Jews as a class hate Jesus. That's just, I mean, it's just bizarre. So I'm talking about, you hate Jesus. I don't hate Jesus. Jesus. If Jesus existed, he died 2,000 years ago. Why would I bother to hate him? I mean, it's just bizarre. I mean, an interesting indication of the mindset of these people and these Christian conservatives, and how, I mean, again, talk about dumb Christian conservatives. Now, I don't know how much of a platform, how much of following Nick Fuentes says, but the mere fact that this video made it on Twitter and got a fair amount of circulation is an indication of the problem I'm trying to identify, which is that Nick Fuentes here is being a typically dumb conservative. This is just an idiotic thing to say about anybody at all. It's not only idiotic, but it's vicious and mean-spirited and hateful. And he's the one who's hating on people by talking about how, suggesting that Jews hate Jesus. I don't know that Jews. I suspect the attitude of any given individual Jew toward Jesus would vary to some extent. I mean, presumably, again, if you're a Jew, that means by definition you don't recognize Jesus as Savior unless you want. And are you aware, right, that certain in certain quarters of Christian, certain types of Christians will actively try to convert Jews, and when they convert a Jew, they call the Jew a completed Jew. That's really gross. Leave people alone. This is my thing about conservatives. They always want to get in other people's business. They always want to pick on everybody else. They got it. They want to convert Jews. They want to stop gay people from being gay. Now the other thing that's really driving me crazy right now, the conservatives always need to have somebody to pick on. They always need a scapegoat. The Nazis obviously picked the Jews as their key scapegoat. For the most part, in the United States, and in a sort of slightly different way, African Americans have largely functioned as a good scapegoat for most white conservatives in the United States, and that's really gross because African Americans don't deserve that. They're just hanging out trying to live their lives and leave them alone, let them do their thing. But right now, anyway, the Republican Party in particular has decided that an easy target for them to help win their elections, and that's the only thing that's going on here. There's absolutely no policy rationale, policy law. I mean, so you can have politics and policy, and the two are intimately intertwined. There's no way to separate the two fully. But in theory, anyway, policy should drive politics. So you should try to win elective office because, for example, Barack Obama thought it was important to enact some sort of healthcare reform. That was the big thing he ran in 2008. And then when he got into office, the economy collapsed. So he got Congress to pass a large stimulus, which contributed to economic growth throughout the Trump administration until the COVID recession. So you hear people talking about economic growth during Trump. It's ascribed to Obama and the stimulus that Obama passed in 2009. Because in fact, if you look at unemployment and GDP growth, unemployment went steadily downward, GDP growth went steadily upward. GDP growth, they talk about roaring economy under Trump. The economy is not roaring under Trump. The economy was simmering along just fine with, sort of not impressive, but certainly not inadequate growth as a result of the Obama stimulus. Trump gets zero credit. Trump did absolutely nothing to stimulate any economic growth. He signed that tax cut, but of course, as usual, the Republicans have an absurdly grotesque estimation of the impact of their tax cuts. And they're still out there trying to talk about how these tax cuts will pay for themselves. Never happened, never will. Not gonna happen. It's ridiculous. It's a dumb Republican conservative fantasy that, you cut taxes, you're gonna unleash so much economic growth that you're gonna increase tax revenues. It has not, never happened. Didn't happen under Ronald Reagan, didn't happen under George Bush, didn't happen under Donald Trump. So Donald Trump doesn't deserve any particular credit for increasing economic growth. And he doesn't even really deserve blame for the COVID recession because inevitably, yet everybody decides they're going to start staying home in order to avoid getting COVID. You're going to have a recession because all of a sudden people are going to stop spending money, and spending money is the primary source of economic growth in the United States, personal consumption. And so obviously a recession was to some extent inevitable. The recession did not have to be as bad as it was because Donald Trump screwed up, and Donald Trump handled the COVID epidemic badly, and he undermined people's confidence in the federal government and its ability to respond to a threat like COVID because Obama had a whole plan for emerging unknown new viral infections, and he threw it out because he's too stupid to understand. We literally, the CDC literally had a person implanted in China absorbing what the Chinese were doing in terms of infectious diseases, and Trump fired that person because he didn't understand how important it was to keep track of emerging infectious diseases because Trump is just an idiot. Trump is the model of the stupid conservative. But anyway, so that's so we were talking about it. So point is, and oh right, and but so policy. It should be the case that you attempt to win election because you want to have an impact on public policy. The last responsible Republican president, Dwight Eisenhower, he initiated the idea that became the interstate highway system, which obviously had a huge impact on American society. Not, I mean, and obviously there's people who can present reasons why the impact of the interstate highway system has not been entirely beneficial, and that's an important, interesting argument, useful argument to have, discussion to have. And that's clearly the case in some ways because it drove the expansion of suburbs, which is, I mean, that's kind of a complicated issue that we get into the large discussion about that. But anyway, Eisenhower clearly saw, the Eisenhower did, and he had a basically military rationale for the interstate highway system. He was actually worried about the Soviets invading, which is ridiculous, but that's a whole separate question. But Eisenhower also signed the bill of creating NASA, which is important. I mean, space exploration is another thing that people are going to debate back and forth whether it's worth doing or not. But it's seeing a lot of interesting stuff out there. And NASA is an important federal agency that does a lot of in terms of its mission. It seems like a really highly effective agency that gets a lot done with the money that we give it. So anyway, so Eisenhower was the last responsible Republican president. He ran for president. Who knows why? But because he thought he would do good things for the United States as a whole, and he probably did. But why did he? Since Eisenhower, Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford doesn't really count that much because he only ran for president because he's already president. Ronald Reagan, again, George W. the elder George Bush, just because he was vice president and he had a pretty easy shot in 1988. And George W. Bush and Donald Trump, none of them really had any clear policy rationale or any clear idea of why they wanted to be president, in the United States. Now, obviously, Clinton ran on healthcare reform and failed at it pretty miserably right out of the box. But then Barack Obama ran on healthcare reform and got a pass within 2 years of becoming president. And so he had a very clear policy agenda for one of the things he wanted to do as president. And so his policy drove his politics. Donald Trump wouldn't know policy if you made a cast iron skillet out of it and banged him in the head with it. He doesn't understand. He does not. He can't. I mean, as near as I can tell, Donald Trump can't think from A to B long enough to be able to think of a policy. A policy is a plan, decision to say enact certain pieces of legislation that you expect to have far-reaching consequences into the indefinite future, right? So Barack Obama wanted to enact healthcare reform because he wanted to change certain aspects of the way that we get healthcare in the United States and health insurance, especially, which is totally. And that's a whole other, still complicated issue that we have to continue arguing about. But anyway, but he did in fact get a statute passed that Donald Trump systematically tried to undermine for no good reason, because Republicans just hate healthcare reform, the Affordable Care Act, and the reason why Republicans don't like the Affordable Care Act is because they knew, it's still the case that as a class, African Americans fall at the bottom of just about every metric of social well-being, including the access to health insurance. And so it is clear from the beginning that insofar as the Affordable Care Act would help a lot of poor people who didn't have health insurance get health insurance, the beneficiaries would be disproportionately African American. A lot, mostly, still numerically, mostly white people, because African Americans only make about 14% of the population. It's almost impossible to make African Americans have to be a numerical majority of anything in the United States because they're such small. They're only 14% of the population. So the numerical majority of the people who are going to benefit would be white people, but still disproportionately benefit African Americans. And Republicans just can't stand that idea. The Republican Party is now based, conservatism is now based, insofar as the Republican Party is the conservative party, which again begs the question, but the Republican Party is now, since Richard Nixon, rests firmly on a principle of advancing, perpetuating, not perpetuating and advancing white supremacy. And they don't want to help African Americans at all if they can help it, if they can avoid it. But it's part of the reason why. So notice, Republicans always hated the Affordable Care Act. And the one thing about the Affordable Care Act they had any control over was the expansion of Medicaid, which they've consistently refused to do. And this is such a clear example of the way in which white supremacists shoot themselves in the foot all the time just to hurt black people. I mean, it's just as dumb as it can possibly be. It's a classic example of conservatives being really, really stupid. So there was never any good reason not to expand Medicaid. And the Affordable Care Act as a whole was going to disproportionately help African Americans, but expansion of Medicaid was especially going to be sort of really the sort of key nexus part of, because it's clearly the case that and of course inevitably since now the white supremacists, and it used to be Democrats were the white supremacists, now Republicans are white supremacists, so the South went from being primarily Democratic to primarily Republican, and it's primarily, and of course it's still the case that most African Americans live in the South. So states that had large African American populations that refused to expand Medicaid, and refusing to expand Medicaid means that you're paying your citizens, the people in your state are paying federal taxes, and they're not getting a huge benefit back from their federal taxes because Medicaid dollars come out of the general budget. I mean, it's just there is absolutely no legitimate reason not to expand Medicaid, but Republicans don't like it, so they refuse to expand Medicaid. Very, very dumb. A classic example of conservatives just being butt stupid. I mean, just you've got to be kidding me. There's absolutely no excuse for that. But of course, white supremacy uber alles, and so they decided they needed to refuse to expand Medicaid because it would help African Americans disproportionately, and they did. But anyway, so politics should follow policy, and now with Republicans again, it almost never does, and certainly not with Donald Trump again, because Donald Trump doesn't know any policy. The only thing that remotely resembling a policy that Donald Trump came up with was build the wall, which is not really a policy at all. It's just a stupid catchphrase. And then also wanted to prohibit Muslims from people from majority Muslim nations entering the country, which is kind of a policy, but it's a pernicious, horrible policy that, I don't care what the Supreme Court says, violates the Constitution. Now, they copied on the national security excuse, but there was no national security rationale for doing that. And it's basically just discrimination on the basis of people's religious beliefs, which the Constitution prohibits. And so, but the Supreme Court screwed up on allowing him to get away with that nonsense. And the federal judges who struck down the Muslim ban when it first came out, and of course the administration had to modify the Muslim ban 2 times before they get it past the Supreme Court. But anyway, they should never been able to get away with that at all. But anyway, and then talk about a political move. So picking on transgender people has absolutely zero policy basis whatsoever. So it is simply the case that transgender persons are persons who feel that their inner sense of their gender identity, whether a man or a woman, is at odds with their physical anatomy, right? So you're born with boy parts, and you feel somewhere in your life you come to feel that you're a girl or a woman. And apparently, it's a very strong, very, very strong sense. I mean, and people talk, I don't understand. Well, I don't understand it. It's not my experience. I don't, I have boy parts. I'm perfectly happy being a man. I think being a woman is a pain in the ass in our society because people have to put up with a lot of sexism. I have no desire to become a woman. I'm perfectly happy being a man, But there are plenty of people out there who feel very strongly that they have male anatomy, but they feel like women. I mean, it's a small portion of the population, but there are plenty of people out there. And then there are people who are born with female anatomy, but who still feel like men inside. And so, and so what I don't understand about this is why this is anybody else's business, okay? So if you happen to be transgender, okay, and this has an impact on my life, wow, it doesn't have any impact on anybody else's life. It can have a significant impact on transgender people's lives, but mostly because of the fact that there's a bunch of stupid, irrational discrimination and prejudice against transgender persons flooding around in our culture for no good reason. It's purely Christian conservatism that says, well, by golly, God imputes your gender to you, and you're not, God doesn't make mistakes. So if you're born male, you need to be man, and if you're born female, you need to be woman. Well, no, that just all sorts of reasons why that's ridiculous. But anyway, but now Republicans decide, picking on transgender people is good politics. It's not good policy, but it's good politics. They think it's going to help them win elections to go around and scapegoat transgender people. And so they're out there scapegoating transgender people on 12 cylinders. And it's really grotesque, and it really should stop. And there's no better reason to pick on transgender people than there is to pick on Jews. I mean, in some sense, they're virtually interchangeable categories. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of difference. You know, Jews have a long-standing historical tradition reaching back 5,000 years, and being Jewish is essentially an ethnicity as well, a religious belief, and they have a well-developed religious intellectual tradition to rely on. And transgender people, pretty much, obviously, that we can tell, have been around pretty much forever as well. But they didn't necessarily think of it that way. They didn't necessarily use that term. But as early as the 16th century, Balboa, who's one of the first Christians to invade the Americas and whip up on natives here in the Americas, was traveling across what we now call Panama, and he stumbled across a group of men who were dressed as women. So he said, "No, look, here's this group of native people in this place I've never been to before. I've never been here before. I have no idea who these people are. I have no idea what they're about, but they're men dressed as women." And so, as a good conservative, and he fed a bunch of them to his dogs to kill them. So this is a classic conservative rationale. Oh, look, here's something I'm not part of my experience. I don't understand it. So what I'm going to do is kill the people who are doing it. In a place he's never been before, people he's never seen before. These people are having it's presumably well embedded in their culture. They have a culture. They have a society. They're happy hanging out doing what they like doing. They're not harming anybody. They're men dressed as women. But Balboa needs to kill them by feeding them to his dogs because he's a good Christian conservative. That I mean, it just dumbfounds me that, and that's basically sort of the same impulse now from the 16th century that is 500 years later. They're still operating on basically the same principle. Conservatives see, icky transgender people, we need to go pick on them. We need to make sure. And now, of course, it's come down to the issue of whether or not. So it is the case that apparently you can identify, you exhibit behavior and identify yourself as transgender fairly early in life. And then when you go through adolescence, which is already horrible enough in the United States, who wants to be a teenager again? Not me. The time in your life when being transgender starts to really matter because if you're a female, you're going to start menstruating, which if you believe you see for yourself to be a man, it can be a big deal. And then if you're if you're anatomically male but you feel like you're a woman, you should be growing breasts, and it's just a huge deal. But there are doctors out there who will provide medical care, what's called gender affirming medical care, to such persons. And again, why is that anybody else's business? But yet in Tennessee, just yesterday, there's this huge rally on Legislative Plaza, which I've been to many times before. It's a plaza that's literally the ceiling, the roof of the state legislature built its building for itself under the ground in downtown Nashville, right across the street from the state capitol. It's really not great, but anyway, I've been down there. It's not great, but it exists. And on top of the legislative building, there's a thing called Legislative Plaza, and a bunch of Marsha Blackburn, and a bunch of other good conservatives were out there deliberately, emphatically, loudly picking on transgender people just because they had nothing better to do. Now, this became an issue partly because of the fact that apparently somebody identified Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville as being a place that provided gender affirming care to transgender teenagers, and they said they need to go pick on them. And they talk gruesome stuff about going to do surgery and cut off people's penises and cut off people's boobs and all that kind of stuff. Well, no, not until they're 18 at least, because that's a big decision. I need to be an adult and think that through very carefully. And some transgender people find it really kind of insulting and patronizing, but it is the case in the United States anyway. And a lot of transgender people, if they can't afford to, they'll go abroad to get surgery because then they don't have to put up with the bullshit about psychiatrists saying, well, you have to live in the target gender for a year before they'll let you have surgery. Which, I mean, and I tend to be pretty libertarian about that. Say, let people decide when they want to have surgery and especially if they can just go abroad and do it abroad, then, what's the point in having the rule here? But anyway, of course, not everybody can afford to go abroad, but it's kind of a complicated issue. But I think it's let people have surgery when they have surgery, once they're adults. But that's all. But this whole business about gender mutilation of children is not happening. It's pure conservative fantasy. It's the kind of thing that conservatives stupidly dreamt up because they want it. It's purely a political issue. There's no policy rationale there at all. They're just doing it because they think it's going to help them win elections, which is really grotesque in my opinion. And then they're scapegoating. They're just picking on people for sheer joy, picking on people because they're stupid conservatives. And I think it's grotesque and it should stop. Okay, so finally, I'm going to stop now. Again, I have a book out and at the broadest macro level, I don't necessarily talk that much about transgender people, but in my book, but broadest macro level, I talk about this point that The Republican Party no longer essentially has, I mean, one way of putting my point in the book is that they no longer essentially have any policy rationale for anything they do. They only seek high office because, not because they have good ideas that they want to use to help the country, like the interstate highway system or NASA or healthcare reform or, anything else. All they want is cut taxes, cut taxes, cut taxes, which is their solution to everything. It doesn't help anybody at all. It helps their rich friends get richer, but other than that, it's just not good for the country as a whole. Republicans usually have no policy positions at all discernible. They just want to hold office, and then because they're like spoiled children, they want to have power so that nobody else can have it. I want this guy, so you can't have it. Nanny, nanny, boo, boo. It's basically the Republican attitude. My book is called "The GOP Will Not Govern." The book is called "The GOP Will Not Govern." I would encourage you to please go buy my book and review it someplace if you can. Review it on Amazon, review it on Books and Barnes and Noble, review it in your favorite local book club group or whatever. Any place you can review it, please go ahead and review it. But please buy a copy of The GOP Will Not Govern. It's available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. Thank you. Goodbye. Bye bye and bye bonds.